Chapter 22 The Old Lady and Curdie. Up the stair they went, and the next, and the next, and through the long rows of empty rooms, and up the little tower stairs, Irene growing happier and happier as she ascended. There was no answer when she knocked at length at the door of the workroom, nor could she hear any sound of the spinning wheel, and once more her heart sank within her, but only for a moment, as she turned and knocked at the other door. "Come in," answered the sweet voice of her grandmother, and Irene opened the door and entered, followed by Curdie. "You darling!" cried the lady, who was seated by a fire of red roses mingled with white. "I've been waiting for you, and indeed getting a little anxious about you, and beginning to think whether I had not better go and fetch you myself." As she spoke, she took the little princess in her arms and placed her upon her lap. She was dressed in white now, and looking, if possible, more lovely than ever. "I've brought Curdie, grandmother. He wouldn't believe what I told him, and so I've brought him." "Yes, I see him. He is a good boy, Curdie, and a brave boy. Aren't you glad you have got him out?" "Yes, grandmother, but it wasn't very good of him not to believe me when I was telling him the truth. People must believe what they can, and those who believe more must not be hard upon those who believe less. I doubt if you would have believed it all yourself if you hadn't seen some of it." "Ah, yes, grandmother, I dare say. I'm sure you are right, but he'll believe me now." "I don't know that," replied her grandmother. "Won't you, Curdie?" said Irene, looking round at him as she asked the question. He was standing in the middle of the floor, staring, and looking strangely bewildered. This, she thought, came of his astonishment at the beauty of the lady. "Make a bow to my grandmother, Curdie," she said. "I don't see any grandmother," answered Curdie rather gruffly. "Don't see my grandmother when I'm sitting in her lap?" exclaimed the princess. "No, I don't," said Curdie, almost sulkily. "Don't you see the lovely fire of roses? White ones among them this time?" asked Irene, almost as bewildered as he. "No, I don't," answered Curdie, almost sulkily. "Nor the blue bed, nor the rose-colored counterpane, nor the beautiful light like the moon hanging from the roof? You're making game of me, your Royal Highness, and after what we have come through together this day, I don't think it is kind of you," said Curdie, feeling very much hurt. "Then what do you see?" asked Irene, who perceived at once that for her not to believe him was at least as bad as for him not to believe her. "I see a big bare garret room, like the one in my mother's cottage, only big enough to take the cottage itself in, and leave a good margin all round," answered Curdie. "And what more do you see?" "I see a tub, and a heap of musty straw, and a withered apple, and a ray of sunlight coming through a hole in the middle of the roof, and shining on your head, and making all the place look a curious dusky brown." "I think you had better drop it, princess, and go down to the nursery like a good girl." "But don't you hear my grandmother talking to me?" asked Irene, almost crying. "No, I hear the cooing of a lot of pigeons. If you won't come down, I will go without you. I think that will be better anyhow, for I'm sure nobody who met us would believe a word we said to them. They would think we made it all up. I don't expect anybody but my own father and mother to believe me. They know I wouldn't tell a story." "And yet you won't believe me, Curdie," expostulated the princess, now fairly crying with vexation and sorrow at the gulf between her and Curdie. "No, I can't, and I can't help it," said Curdie, turning to leave the room. "What shall I do, grandmother?" sobbed the princess, turning her face round upon the lady's bosom and shaking with suppressed sobs. You must give him time, said her grandmother, and you must be content not to be believed for a while. It is very hard to bear, and I have had to bear it, and shall have to bear it many a time yet. I will take care of what Chpt thinks of you in the end. You must let him go now. You are not coming, are you? Asked Chpt. No, Chpt. My grandmother says I must let you go. Turn to the right when you get to the bottom of all the stairs, and in that way you will arrive safely at the hall where the great door is. Oh, I don't doubt I can find my way, without you, Princess, or your old granny's thread either, said Chpt quite rudely. Oh, Chpt, Chpt! I wish I had gone home at once. I'm very much obliged to you, Irene, for getting me out of that hole, but I wish you hadn't made a fool of me afterward. He said this as he opened the door, which he left open, and, without a word, went down the stairs. Irene listened with dismay to his departing footsteps. Then turning again to the lady, "What does it all mean, grandmother?" she sobbed, and burst into fresh tears. "It means, my love, that I did not mean to show myself. Chpt is not yet able to believe some things. Seeing is not believing, it is only seeing. You remember I told you that if Ludi were to see me, she would rub her eyes, forget the half she saw, and call the other half nonsense. Yes, but I should have thought Chpt. You are right, Chpt is much farther on than Ludi, and you will see what will come of it. But in the meantime, you must be content, I say, to be misunderstood for a while. We are all very anxious to be understood, and it is very hard not to be, but there is one thing much more necessary." "What is that, grandmother?" "To understand other people." "Yes, grandmother, I must be fair, for if I'm not fair to other people, I'm not worth being understood myself, I see. So as Chpt can't help it, I will not be vexed with him, but just wait." "There's my own dear child," said her grandmother, and pressed her close to her bosom. "Why weren't you in your workroom when we came up, grandmother?" asked Irene, after a few moments' silence. "If I had been there, Chpt would have seen me well enough, but why should I be there rather than in this beautiful room? I thought you would be spinning." "I've nobody to spin for just at present. I never spin without knowing for whom I am spinning." "That reminds me, there is one thing that puzzles me," said the princess. "How are you to get the thread out of the mountain again? Surely you won't have to make another for me. That would be such a trouble." The lady set her down, and rose, and went to the fire. Putting in her hand, she drew it out again, and held up the shining ball between her finger and thumb. "I've got it now, you see," she said, coming back to the princess, "all ready for you when you want it." Going to the cabinet, she laid it in the same drawer as before. "And here is your ring," she added, taking it from the little finger of her left hand and putting it on the forefinger of Irene's right hand. "Oh, thank you, grandmother. I feel so safe now." "You are very tired, my child," the lady went on. "Your hands are hurt with the stones, and I have counted 9 bruises on you. Just look what you are like." And she held up to her a little mirror which she had brought from the cabinet. The princess burst into a merry laugh at the sight. She was so draggled with the stream, and dirty with creeping through narrow places, that if she had seen the reflection without knowing it was a reflection, she would have taken herself for some gypsy child whose face was washed and hair combed about once a month. The lady laughed too, and lifting her again upon her knee, took off her cloak and nightgown. Then she carried her to the side of the room. Irene wondered what she was going to do with her, but asked no questions, only starting a little when she found that she was going to lay her in the large silver bath, for as she looked into it, again she saw no bottom, but the stars shining miles away, as it seemed in a great blue gulf. Her hands closed involuntarily on the beautiful arms that held her, and that was all. The lady pressed her once more to her bosom, saying, "Do not be afraid, my child." "No, grandmother," answered the princess with a little gasp, and the next instant she sank in the clear, cool water. When she opened her eyes, she saw nothing but a strange, lovely blue over and beneath and all about her. The lady and the beautiful room had vanished from her sight, and she seemed utterly alone. But instead of being afraid, she felt more than happy, perfectly blissful. And from somewhere came the voice of the lady, singing a strange, sweet song, of which she could distinguish every word, but of the sense she had only a feeling, no understanding. Nor could she remember a single line after it was gone. It vanished, like the poetry in a dream, as fast as it came. In after years, however, she would sometimes fancy that snatches of melody, suddenly rising in her brain, must be little phrases and fragments of the air of that song, and the very fancy would make her happier and abler to do her duty. How long she lay in the water she did not know. It seemed a long time, not from weariness, but from pleasure. But at last she felt the beautiful hands lay hold of her, and through the gurgling waters she was lifted out into the lovely room. The lady carried her to the fire and sat down with her in her lap and dried her tenderly with the softest towel. It was so different from Ludi's drying. When the lady had done, she stooped to the fire and drew from it her nightgown, as white as snow. "How delicious!" exclaimed the princess. "It smells of all the roses in the world, I think." When she stood up on the floor, she felt as if she had been made over again. Every bruise and all weariness were gone, and her hands were soft and whole as ever. "Now, I am going to put you to bed for a good sleep," said her grandmother. "But what will Ludi be thinking, and what am I to say to her when she asks me where I have been?" "Don't trouble yourself about it. You will find it all come right," said her grandmother, and laid her into the blue bed under the rosy counterpane. "There is just one thing more," said Irene. "I am a little anxious about Curdie. As I brought him into the house, I ought to have seen him safe on his way home." "I took care of that," answered the lady. "I told you to let him go, and therefore I was bound to look after him. Nobody saw him, and he is now eating a good dinner in his mother's cottage, far up the mountain." "Then I will go to sleep," said Irene, and in a few minutes she was fast asleep. Chapter 23. Curdie and his Mother. Curdie went up the mountain, neither whistling nor singing, for he was vexed with Irene for taking him in, as he called it, and he was vexed with himself for having spoken to her so angrily. His mother gave a cry of joy when she saw him, and at once set about getting him something to eat, asking him questions all the time, which he did not answer so cheerfully as usual. When his meal was ready, she left him to eat it and hurried to the mine to let his father know he was safe. When she came back, she found him fast asleep upon her bed, nor did he wake until the arrival home of his father in the evening. "Now, Curdie," his mother said, as they sat at supper, "tell us the whole story from beginning to end, just as it all happened." Curdie obeyed, and told everything to the point where they came out upon the lawn in the garden of the king's house. "And what happened after that?" asked his mother. "You haven't told us all. You ought to be very happy at having got away from the demons, and instead of that, I never saw you so gloomy." There must be something more. Besides, you do not speak of that lovely child as I should like to hear you. She saved your life at the risk of her own, and yet somehow you don't seem to think much of it." "She talked such nonsense," answered Gertie, "and told me a pack of things that weren't a bit true, and I can't get over it." "What were they?" asked his father. "Your mother may be able to throw some light upon them." Then Gertie made a clean breast of it and told them everything. They all sat silent for some time, pondering the strange tale. At last Gertie's mother spoke. "You confess, my boy," she said. "There is something about the whole affair you do not understand." "Yes, of course, mother," he answered. "I cannot understand how a child knowing nothing about the mountain, or even that I was shut up in it, should come all that way alone, straight to where I was, and then, after getting me out of the hole, lead me out of the mountain too, where I should not have known a step of the way if it had been as light as in the open air." "Then you have no right to say what she told you was not true. She did take you out, and she must have had something to guide her. Why not a thread, as well as a rope, or anything else? There is something you cannot explain, and her explanation may be the right one." "It's no explanation at all, mother, and I can't believe it." "That may be only because you do not understand it. If you did, you would probably find it was an explanation and believe it thoroughly. I don't blame you for not being able to believe it, but I do blame you for fancying such a child would try to deceive you. Why should she? Depend upon it, she told you all she knew. Until you have found a better way of accounting for it all, you might at least have been more sparing of your judgment." "That is what something inside me has been saying all the time," said Gertie, hanging down his head. "But what do you make of the grandmother? That is what I can't get over. To take me up to an old garret and try to persuade me against the sight of my own eyes that it was a beautiful room, with blue walls and silver stars, and no end of things in it, when there was nothing there but an old tub and a withered apple and a heap of straw and a sunbeam. It was too bad. She might have had some old woman there at least who could pass for her precious grandmother." "Didn't she speak as if she saw those other things herself, Gertie?" "Yes, that's what bothers me. You would have thought she really meant and believed that she saw every one of the things she talked about, and not one of them there. It was too bad, I say." "Perhaps some people can see things other people can't see, Gertie," said his mother very gravely. "I think I will tell you something I saw myself once. Only, perhaps you won't believe me either." "Oh, mother, mother," cried Gertie, bursting into tears. "I don't deserve that, surely." "But what I am going to tell you is very strange," persisted his mother. "And if having heard it, you were to say I must have been dreaming, I don't know that I should have any right to be vexed with you, though I know at least I was not asleep. Do tell me, mother. Perhaps it will help me to think better of the princess." "That's why I am tempted to tell you," replied his mother. "But first, I may as well mention that according to old whispers, there is something more than common about the king's family, and the queen was of the same blood, for they were cousins of some degree. There were strange stories told concerning them, all good stories, but strange, very strange. What they were I cannot tell, for I only remember the faces of my grandmother and my mother as they talked together about them. There was wonder and awe, not fear, in their eyes, and they whispered and never spoke aloud. But what I saw myself was this. Your father was going to work in the mine one night, and I had been down with his supper. It was soon after we were married, and not very long before you were born. He came with me to the mouth of the mine, and left me to go home alone, for I knew the way almost as well as the floor of our own cottage. It was pretty dark, and in some parts of the road where the rocks overhung, nearly quite dark. But I got along perfectly well, never thinking of being afraid, until I reached a spot you know well enough, Chpt, where the path has to make a sharp turn out of the way of a great rock on the left-hand side. When I got there, I was suddenly surrounded by half a dozen of the cobs, the first I had ever seen, although I had heard tell of them often enough. One of them blocked up the path, and they all began tormenting and teasing me in a way it makes me shudder to think of even now. "If I had only been with you," cried father and son in a breath. The mother gave a funny little laugh and went on. "They had some of their horrible creatures with them too, and I must confess I was dreadfully frightened. They had torn my clothes very much, and I was afraid they were going to tear myself to pieces, when suddenly a great white soft light shone upon me. I looked up. A broad ray, like a shining road, came down from a large globe of silvery light, not very high up, indeed not quite so high as the horizon, so it could not have been a new star or another moon or anything of that sort. The cobs dropped persecuting me and looked dazed, and I thought they were going to run away, but presently they began again. The same moment, however, down the path from the globe of light came a bird, shining like silver in the sun. It gave a few rapid flaps at first, and then, with its wings straight out, shot sliding down the slope of the light. It looked to me just like a white pigeon. But whatever it was, when the cobs caught sight of it coming straight down upon them, they took to their heels and scampered away across the mountain, leaving me safe, only much frightened. As soon as it had sent them off, the bird went gliding again up the light, and just at the moment it reached the globe, the light disappeared, just the same as if a shutter had been closed over a window, and I saw it no more. But I had no more trouble with the cobs that night, or at any time afterward." "How strange!" exclaimed Chpt. "Yes, it is strange, but I can't help believing it, whether you do or not," said his mother. "It's exactly as your mother told it to me the very next morning," said his father. "You don't think I'm doubting my own mother?" cried Chpt. "There are other people in the world quite as well worth believing as your own mother," said his mother. "I don't know that she's so much the fitter to be believed than she happens to be your mother, Mr. Chpt. There are mothers far more likely to tell lies than that little girl I saw talking to the primroses a few weeks ago. If she were to lie, I should begin to doubt my own word." "But princesses have told lies, as well as other people," said Chpt. "Yes, but not princesses like that child. She's a good girl, I am certain, and that's more than being a princess. Depend upon it, you will have to be sorry for behaving so to her, Chpt. You ought at least to have held your tongue." "I am sorry now," answered Chpt. "You ought to go and tell her so, then." "I don't see how I can manage that. They wouldn't let a minor boy like me have a word with her alone. And I couldn't tell her before that nurse of hers. She'd be asking ever so many questions, and I don't know how many of them the little princess would like me to answer. She told me that Ludi didn't know anything about her coming to get me out of the mountain. I am certain she would have prevented her somehow if she had known it, but I may have a chance before long, and in the meantime I must try to do something for her. I think, father, I have got on the track at last." "Have you indeed, my boy?" said Peter. "I am sure you deserve some success. You have worked very hard for it. What have you found out?" "It's difficult, you know, father, inside the mountain, especially in the dark, and not knowing what turns you have taken to tell the lie of things outside. Impossible, my boy, without a chart, or at least a compass, returned his father. Well, I think I have nearly discovered in what direction the cobs are mining. If I am right, I know something else that I can put to it, and then 1 and 1 will make 3. They very often do, Curdy, as we miners ought to be well aware. Now tell us, my boy, what the 2 things are, and see whether we guess at the same third as you. I don't see what that has to do with the princess, interposed his mother. I will soon let you see that, mother. Perhaps you may think me foolish, but until I am sure there is nothing in my present fancy, I am more determined than ever to go on with my observations. Just as we came to the channel by which we got out, I heard the miners at work somewhere near. I think down below us. Now since I began to watch them, they have made a good half-mile in a straight line. And so far as I am aware, they are working in no other part of the mountain, but I never could tell in what direction they were going. When we came out in the king's garden, however, I thought at once whether it was possible they were working towards the king's house. And what I want to do tonight is to make sure whether they are or not. I will take a light with me. Oh, Curdy, cried his mother, then they will see you. I'm no more afraid of them than I was before, rejoined Curdy. Now that I've got this precious shoe, they can't make another such in a hurry, and 1 barefoot will do for my purpose. Woman as she may be, I won't spare her next time, but I shall be careful with my light, for I don't want them to see me. I won't stick it in my hat. Go on then, and tell us what you mean to do. I mean to take a bit of paper with me and a pencil, and go in at the mouth of the stream by which we came out. I shall mark on the paper, as near as I can, the angle of every turning I take until I find the cobs at work, and so get a good idea in what direction they are going. If it should prove to be nearly parallel with the stream, I shall know it is toward the king's house they are working. And what if you should? How much wiser will you be then? Wait a minute, mother dear. I told you that when I came up upon the royal family in the cave, they were talking of their prince, Harelip, they called him, marrying a sun woman. That means one of us, one with toes to her feet. Now, in the speech one of them made that night at their great gathering, of which I only heard a part of, he said that peace would be secured for a generation, at least by the pledge the prince would hold for the good behavior of her relatives. That's what he said, and he must have meant the sun woman the prince was to marry. I am sure the king is much too proud to wish his son to marry any but a princess, and much too knowing to fancy that his having a peasant woman for a wife would be of any material advantage to them. I see what you are driving at now, said his mother. But, said his father, the king would dig the mountain to the plain before he would have his princess the wife of a cob, if he were 10 times a prince. Yes, but they think so much of themselves, said his mother. Small creatures always do. The bantam is the proudest cock in my little yard. And I fancy, said Curdy, if they once get her, they would tell the king they would kill her except he consented to the marriage. They might say so, said his father, but they wouldn't kill her. They would keep her alive, for the sake of the hold it gave them over our king. Whatever he did to them, they would threaten to do the same to the princess. And they are bad enough to torment her just for their own amusement. I know that, said his mother. Anyhow, I will keep a watch on them and see what they are up to, said Curdy. It's too horrible to think of. I daren't let myself do it, but they shan't have her, at least if I can help it. So, mother dear, my clue is all right. Will you get me a bit of paper and a pencil and a lump of pease pudding, and I will set out at once. I saw a place where I can climb over the wall of the garden quite easily." "You must mind and keep out of the way of the men on the watch," said his mother. "That I will. I don't want them to know anything about it. They would spoil it all. The cubs would only try some other plan. They are such obstinate creatures. I shall take good care, mother. They won't kill and eat me either if they should come upon me, so you needn't mind them." His mother got him what he asked for, and Chpt set out. Close behind the door by which the princess left the garden for the mountain stood a great rock, and by climbing it, Chpt got over the wall. He tied his clue to a stone just inside the channel of the stream, and took his pickaxe with him. He had not gone far before he encountered a horrid creature coming toward the mouth. The spot was too narrow for two of almost any size or shape, and besides, Chpt had no wish to let the creature pass. Not being able to use his pickaxe, however, he had a severe struggle with him, and it was only after receiving many bites, some of them bad, that he succeeded in killing him with his pocket knife. Having dragged him out, he made haste to get in again before another should stop up the way. I need not follow him farther in this night's adventures. He returned to his breakfast, satisfied that the goblins were mining in the direction of the palace, on so low a level that their intention must be, he thought, be to burrow under the walls of the king's house and rise up in it, in order, he fully believed, to lay hands on the little princess and carry her off for a wife to their horrid harelip. End of chapter 23. Please go to the next video for chapter 24.